The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We are pleased to welcome you to a two-part Volpe Report with special guest Dave McCormick. Dave is about to become, on April 23rd, the Republican nominee for United States Senator from Pennsylvania, taking on a formidable opponent, long-term Democratic Senator Bob Casey. You may remember that in 2022, Dave narrowly lost in the closest Senate race in Pennsylvania history to Dr. Mehmet Oz by approximately 500 votes. That was in the Republican nominee election to run against eventual Senator John Fetterman. That was in 2022. The margin of victory, as I said, was just about 500 votes or so out of millions cast, or to put it in I guess, percentage terms, 0.07 was what he lost by. We bring him back today because last fall he announced that he would be again seeking the Republican nomination, and this time he has it locked up as he's running unopposed. He is going to attempt to flip the seat, as we have said. He has been a darling of the media, though, in the last year and a half since he re-announced his intention to run again, promoting his book, Superpower in Peril, A Battle Plan to Renew America. Just to mention a few national media outlets he's been on over the last year, he's been a special guest of Mark Levine and Sean Hannity on Fox National News. He was featured in the Wall Street Journal in a story by the Barton Swain, as well as a story by Selena Zito in the New York Post. And today, we bring him to you, Northeast and Central Pennsylvania, for two shows. Dave McCormick has extraordinary qualifications. Born and raised in the Pittsburgh area, his family left when Dave was young and moved to Bloomsburg area, right here in this media market. Dave's father, James, was president of Bloomsburg University and chancellor for the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. Dave excelled academically and athletically and received an appointment to West Point Military Academy. He graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. He was a four-time letterman on the Army wrestling team and co-captain. At this point, Dave interrupted his education to begin his military service that is commensurate with receiving a degree from West Point. And he went on to become to the Airborne and Ranger School of the U.S. Army, and he became an honor graduate of the Ranger School. He then joined the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. In 1991, Dave was part of the first wave of U.S. troops sent to Iraq during the first Gulf War. He rose through leadership, becoming the XO of a forward combat engineering company tasked with clearing minefields and destroying enemy munitions. For his accomplishments and valor in battle, Dave was awarded a Bronze Star. Dave then resumed his education, earning his doctorate from Princeton University in International Relations. Dave's career in public service began during the administration of President George W. Bush, where Dave served in several key departments, including the important Undersecretary of the Treasury, being the principal advisor to Secretary of the Treasury Henry Paulson. Dave also served as Undersecretary of Commerce for Industry and Security. And finally, he became a Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economic Policy. We look forward to speaking with Dave today in part one for his reasons for wanting to take up the gauntlet again and run for the U.S. Senate seat he first pursued in 2022. And he will begin part one by discussing the issues that face America.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Dave, welcome back to the Volpe Report.
Good to see you, Chuck.
Good to see you. Here you are again, taking on the challenge of becoming a United States Senator. You have no opposition in the April primary. You've set your sights on a three-term U.S. Senator, Democrat Bob Casey. Why?
Well, thanks for having me. And the last time I ran because I thought the country was headed in the wrong direction. And this time, it's even more true. We're in deep trouble as a country. And we're going in some, and we'll talk about these issues, but the economy, the border, our security is truly at risk.
Crime.
And so I believe that if you love America, if you think you've been blessed by everything America has to offer, which I have been blessed, I have lived a life that I never imagined I could, and you think you can actually do something about the challenges, then this is the time to jump into the ring. And all summer, my wife and I thought about it, we prayed about it, we decided we weren't going to do it multiple times. But I kept getting drawn back to this notion of duty, honor, country. And that's what we learned at West Point. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I've had a great career, a great life, but I've failed a lot of times. And
as we all have.
I've learned from that failure that you gain strength. And so I think I'm a better candidate. It was a gut check for me. Do I really want to do this? I really want to do this. I really want to serve the people of Pennsylvania. And I think I'm a much more formidable candidate. I think I'm going to win in part because I lost and the lessons I learned.
Right. Well, I've said about my own life, Dave, and I'm sensing that from you, that, the Lord works in mysterious ways.
For sure.
And my father had a way of saying, he said, Chuck, when one door closes, another one opens. If I look back at my own life, the road I'm on to this very day, and there were many twists and turns along that way and many forks. I don't always pick the right one, but I'm on the road I should be on today, and it was because of the failures.
Yeah.
If I had the comfort of victory, I would have been on a road and then complacency sets in. And, my dad made a better analogy to me. He said, the team that wins, the champion, doesn't change much. Complacency sets in, they're the best. But the team that loses, that gets beat, obviously knows what didn't work. It has to go right work. And that's why you've heard the old expression in football parlance, it's tough to beat the same opponent multiple times.
Yeah.
Well, I find that we end up on the road the Lord intended us to be on. You are clearly on that road. So Godspeed in your endeavors, Dave.
Thank you.
So we talked about the issues. Let me just go through the laundry list in the sense, even though you're not, let's say, on this show, obviously every so once in a while, my audience hears these issues, so they know what I rail about and what I'm upset about. So I'm going to take them in no specific order. Let's start with the first thing. I get a knot in my stomach. I get literally cramps of disgust every time I hear Biden say on the campaign trail, when he's on the campaign trail, he says, Bidenomics is working. Yeah. Bidenomics is working. Now, I read a lot of as you do. Things like, I read, believe it or not, I keep up with the New Republic just to hear what those knucklehead progressives are talking about. I, of course, subscribe to the Washington Examiner, National Review, read all the major newspapers. So I have a pretty good flavor. And the consensus was, so bear with me on this. Usually when you floated a talking point, a spin point, something you want to go with as your messaging, and it doesn't work, it gets retired. Right. I know I went through many of them myself. And they trotted Bidenomics out like about a year and a half ago. And by all accounts, the critics pounced. It felt dead, done. Look, everybody's suffering. Don't say Bidenomics again. And I pointed out to my audience in an editorial I did, and in fact, he didn't mention it. It was retired. Well, they've come back with it. Yeah. I like Lazarus, like the zombie apocalypse. Yeah. So talk to me about that.
Well, I think it shows how out of touch the Biden administration is, but also Senator Casey is with what's happening with everyday Americans. So 60%, and you know this, of Pennsylvanians are living paycheck to paycheck. Right. In the last 3 years under Joe Biden, what's happened is prices have gone up on average by 18%. Wages have gone up by 14%. So if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you're buying food and fuel and rent, you're getting squeezed. So it's getting harder and harder to live in the country that's been created, the economy that's been created by Joe Biden. On top of that, the payment on your pickup truck's up by 60%. If you want to buy a new house, the interest rates have gone up significantly. And, oh no, by the way, every American today has $100,000 of debt on their head if you take the $34 trillion of debt and put it across our economy. Yeah. So this is an example of them being out of touch. But the problem is they created this economy. Biden and Casey created this economy. And the way they did that was enormous spending. And you and I have both been critical. Republicans and Democrats alike have spent too much money. Right. But under Joe Biden, it's been a hockey stick. And those $6 trillion of new spending bills, Bob Casey, my opponent in the Senate, voted for every one of them. The second thing they did is they had a war on energy. They reduced the ability to drill and ship our energy abroad. They killed the Keystone Pipeline. All of those things drove up energy prices, which is at the core of the inflation that we're seeing across our economy. And so if you live in Washington, if you live in New York, if you have fancy apartments and real estate, you are better off because all assets went up. If you're most Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck, it's a much tougher economy under Joe Biden.
I heard a statistic. Bob Kennedy was just on the show a couple weeks ago. He gave a statistic, Dave, that I think you're kind of alluding to. Almost 60% of Americans in the latest poll, almost 60% would not be able to put their hands on $1,000
That's it.
if they had an emergency.
No, yeah, that's right. If your car blows up, if you have a small fire,
You lose your job.
Yeah, this isn't an annoyance. This is a catastrophe because you can't go on. No, this is what it means to live paycheck to paycheck. And I think the fact that the stock market's gone up, where a very small percentage of Americans have stocks, that's given the Biden administration, and the top line numbers have gone up, that's given them some false sense of security. The economy's working. The economy is not working. And I hear that every single day on the campaign trail.
You know, I'm trying to wrap my head around intellectually the terminology shrinkflation.
Yeah.
That's another one. So you got Bidenomics. Don't pay attention to that elephant over there. Don't pay attention. It's working.
Exactly.
Oh, one other stat that we didn't mention, by the way. Do you know the amount of personal credit card debt that's been incurred by the country, especially the middle class working people who are living on their credit cards because of the discrepancy in wages to inflation?
Right.
Like, so they're literally getting further and further and further in debt. So beside that. So I got to tell you, that takes a whole amount of guts and chutzpah to try to, and then, so I was saying, I'm trying to understand something about shrinkflation. So the best definition I get is, well, you're getting the same stuff, but you don't realize those evil, greedy, profit-driven corporations. So I said, so in other words, I'm going to get a smaller Clark bar. When I go and buy my Clark bar, is it going to be as big? You know, so comment on shrinkflation.
Yeah, well, you know how when you go, sometimes you're in Philadelphia, you come off the train to Philadelphia, and there's the guy there with the 3 walnuts. And they got a P under it, and you can't follow the P. Yeah. Well, that's what this is. So the economy is failing most Americans. It's the direct result of bad policies, energy policy and too much spending. And so in an effort to hide the ball, President Biden and Senator Casey, this is Senator Casey's signature thing, is he's come out and said it's greedflation, it's shrinkflation, when the cause could not be more clear of what we're dealing with. Now let me say the following, and every mainstream economy, these are big Democrats, Larry Summers, Jason Furman, people that work for President Obama and Biden are all saying, no, the cause of inflation is too much spending and bad energy policy, which has drove up prices. So there's not serious people saying that the problem. Now, I'm sure there's some company somewhere that is, raising prices more than the cost of inflation. So I'm not defending big corporations, but this is what happens when you have a bunch of people making arguments and making policy who have never run a business, who have don't know what it's like to make a budget because they've never had to make a budget, don't know what it's like to create a job. When you have a bunch of people who are somehow disconnected from what it takes to create an economy, small businesses like yours are what create 80% of the jobs in America, then you come up with crazy ideas like the government is somehow going to solve the problem by dictating how many potato chips should be in a bag or something like that. Right. This is what happens when the socialist progressive agenda hijacks policy and takes us in the direction of the left. And that, unfortunately, is what's happened with President Biden and Senator Casey.
Well, then another issue as we're talking about this, you mentioned Dr. Larry Summers, one of the top Ivy League emeritus professors of finance economics. Because of that, he served as Democratic President Barack Obama's cabinet secretary of the Treasury. And he, in even New York Times stories, we know they're not ever accused of leaning right.
He says it.
Look, I literally, again, on another interview I did, I literally excerpted a whole paragraph about what he said. He said, how about this prescient prediction? He said, if you put another $2 trillion into the economy, and after what you already put in, and after what President Trump put in the last year of his term, here's what you're going to get. You're going to have runaway catastrophic inflation. And he said, here's what's going to happen next. The Fed is going to start exponentially increasing the benchmark rates, and interest rates are going to go up and up and up and up. Right. And guess what that gets you? Right into a major recession. Right. They won't even say the R word.
Yeah.
It looks like a recession to me. I don't know what's going on out there. So at any rate, obviously I know we've talked about that, and you're going to hit that issue hard. So let's now turn our subject matter, and I have to turn because my audience has heard also. This government intervention in ways that I believe is counterintuitive and wrong in terms of some of their use of governmental regulation and authority to effectively, I'll say, socially engineer would be the words, Dave, America, in terms of their DEI that's taken over. You would know about this with your business background. ESG, environment, social governance, is what it stands for. Yeah. But see, the government is complicit in that. They're incentivizing banks or punishing them if they invest in things that aren't following the ESG. So we're literally the Democrats are social engineering. And then you can segue from that what they're actually doing to Americans. Like does a third grade need to be even? Does the word gender need to be even mentioned? Yeah. You know, my friend, and I know you know we're friends, Ron DeSantis, former presidential candidate, governor of Florida, had to pass a law, the Parental Rights and Education Act, which the duplicitous Disney and other woke corporations call the Don't Say Gay bill. Yeah. Gay's never mentioned in it. It had nothing to do with gay. They didn't, from kindergarten through third grade, the bill said, you cannot introduce the subject of gender in a classroom. Right. So, talk a little bit about what that part, and then, of course, that gets into trans rights. Yeah. And then we have, Riley Gaines. I know you've seen all over. God love her. What a warrior and a hero for America. Look. To me, the progenitor of the transgender movement was Bruce Jenner. Now it's Caitlyn. I want to get this right. Caitlyn. He has come out. Now she has come out and said, you can't allow men to compete in women's sports. Right. Here's a statistic on that issue, and I'm going to get your take on it. Here's a statistic. I listened to the congressional hearings of some of the people proposing this. They should be allowed to participate. Biological men should be allowed to participate. They listed various records that were held by women, like the fastest 100. Well, that record, compared to men's times, means something like 7,800 men, not even top athletes in high school meets, would have broken the top women's 100-yard. They did it with weightlifting. They did it across the board. So there is empirical, indisputable fact that women should not be. You were a great wrestler. You got a wrestling scholarship to West Point. If we put up a woman of equal weight, again, so talk about some of we have to talk about it. The issues, Americans are under assault to socially engineer our country. You can't, go to a movie now and get the messaging knocking you over, your popcorn goes over. Right. Pick it up.
Well, I think, let me talk about the transgender issue, and let me talk about the macro issue. On the transgender, listen, I'm the father of 6 daughters. Right. Between Dina and me, we have 6 daughters. And the idea that you would permit biological males to compete with our daughters is absolute madness. And that's where the Democratic Party is headed. That's what Senator Casey voted for. And to me, it just defies common sense. This is not... To me, it's just such a commonsensical issue. And as it relates to transgender, I mean, listen, as I said, I'm father of 4 daughters and 2 more stepdaughters, so I've watched kids progress. They're confused when they're younger. They're trying to sort out lots of different things. And so I think to allow kids to make irreconcilable or irreversible decisions before they're truly adults is truly
a crime against humanity.
Absolutely. And on top of that, to introduce teachers and third parties into those conversations, teachers that aren't parents, to me seems like absolute madness.
I mean, the teachers' unions are all friends in the teachers' unions.
Exactly.
They're all part of it.
But it's part of a broader thing, which you say, which is a progressive ideology that's trying to redefine what it means to be an American. The guiding principles that should guide America. You see this happening on the campuses with the marching post October 7th, where the world's defined between the oppressed and the oppressors. That's the model to understand history, to understand everything, and it takes you down a very dangerous path. We see it with the Biden administration's approach to climate change. Now listen, I'm I'm here to tell you that I am a Republican who believes deeply in conservation and protecting the environment, but this is a false choice. And the idea that they've taken trillions of dollars to completely re-engineer our economy, to have an outright war against fossil fuels, and in the process to make us incredibly dependent on China for lithium batteries that go into our electric vehicles or solar panels as we're redefining our economy. This is an ideology that's totally gone amok. Let me give you one more example. The military, which I obviously spend a lot of time thinking about. I was a West Point grad. I served in the Army for 5 years. Under the Biden administration, the U.S. Army released its climate change strategy before it released its warfighting strategy. When you start to embrace this ideology, as this progressive ideology, as the defining goal, you begin to distort everything that makes sense about America. The basic fundamentals of free enterprise, of merit is the driver of and that's why I'm so deeply opposed to it. And what's happened, I think, is the Democratic Party has shifted further and further to the left. It's more and more out of touch with mainstream America. And this is frankly what's happened to Pennsylvania Senator Casey. The guy that ran for office and won 18 years ago is a very different guy in terms of how he's voting and the ideology he's supporting today.
And one more point on the military. Again, I've done so many views now, I could talk about these subjects. How about the issue of what DEI has done to our military relative to promotions and battlefield command promotions and decisions? What the heck does that have to do with learning how to kill the enemy at the end of the day, right, and defend America? What the heck does that have to do? This isn't a kumbaya session,
it's war fighting. Yeah, the entire purpose of the military is to kill the enemy. Anything that distracts from that should be minimized. And the idea that merit of who the warfighters are should guide women or men. Anyone who's a warfighter should move up and lead our men and women into battle. But the idea that other factors should drive selection of general officers or admirals or whatever is absolute madness. And that is the beginning of a slippery slope. I don't want to be too dramatic here, but the basic premise of America is exceptionalism, the exceptionalism of free enterprise, the exceptionalism of merit, the exceptionalism of individual freedom that drives what makes America great. The DEI ideology and the progressive ideology is going dead center at undermining those building blocks of America.
With the fundamental elements of what America has always been, always stood for. And as you and I have talked in past interviews, it comes down, I hate to oversimplify a very complex subject, but it really comes down almost to one black and white issue. You either believe government's function is to create an environment of freedom and opportunity, and they're there to protect those rights, the pursuit of happiness, or you believe government's function is to tell you what rights you have. And the Democrat progressives have determined, more Hobbesian than Lockean, but have determined under the Thomas Hobbes theory that we're born naked and afraid in nature, and the government is there to save you and establish rights. And of course, under the John Locke theory, thanks to guys like Madison and Jefferson and those folks, classic liberals, by the way, Democrats as we would define them today, are understand that government's object is to protect and preserve those rights. So these are fundamental things. And what I view from where I sit in this chair, Dave, is that the shift in the far left Democratic Party that's hijacked the party I was a proud member of for 45 years. When a guy like Bob Kennedy, for example, the Kennedys, leaves the Democratic Party because he says, listen, my Uncle Jack and my father would not recognize the Democratic Party. Look, if that's not an indictment, more than my humble opinion, how about that for an opinion?
Well, for sure, and it's the old Ronald Reagan line comes to mind of the scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you.
Yeah, exactly right. All right, Dave, let's shift gears here now, and let's talk, as we said, we have a laundry list of issues to cover. Let's turn, we've hit Bidenomics and inflation in the economy pretty hard. Let's turn our attention to the issue of crime that's ravaging America. Thanks to George Soros-funded Democratic, progressive, liberal district attorneys and other prosecutors, federal prosecutors appointed by Democratic presidents, that are turning a blind eye to crime. They're not prosecuting it because the whole criminal justice system apparently is systemically racist. And they're not enforcing crime. I've done a view, for example, on Darrell Brooks, the miscreant who ran down and killed children and older folks in a parade when he had been arrested just earlier on other felony serious charges, and then compounds that by trying to run over his wife in the same vehicle he used to slaughter those people, didn't spend any time in jail. Right. He didn't have to post bond. He walked out the door, get out of jail free. The Democrats passed him. And then a few days later, he ran over those people and killed them in the parade.
Yeah.
They're not prosecuting crimes in box stores. I did a view on San Francisco. Schellenberger did a book entitled San Francisco, How Progressives Ruin Cities. So your comment on what the Democratic leadership has done to this country as far as enforcing and prosecuting criminals.
Well, we see it here in Pennsylvania. So in Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, the Soros-funded prosecutor, has put in place a policy where if you steal less than $1,000, you aren't prosecuted, right?
You're good.
I mean, you know Philadelphia. You walk down Walnut Street, Rittenhouse Square, these beautiful parts of Philadelphia. That's where the riots happen, where people are literally breaking the window at Foot Locker and looting and stealing things, and the police can't bring this under control. It's an absolute travesty. I was in Chester County, and violent crime, felons, the whole thing, murder rate at an all-time high, all in Philadelphia. I was in Chester County, I don't know, a month and a half ago. I walked into a sporting goods store. There was a woman proprietor, and I said, hey, tell me, how are sales? She said, sales are great. Gun sales are going through the roof. And I said, who's buying? She said, women. Suburban women buying handguns. If you look at the gun sales around the counties, the collar counties outside Philadelphia, they're on the rise dramatically because people are terrified from the crime, the carjackings coming out of Center City, Philadelphia. Now, I live in Pittsburgh. I went to meet with the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police in Pittsburgh last week. In 2020, they had 1,000 police officers. Today, they had 750 on the way to 650. That's having a huge impact on crime. Literally, in my neighborhood, there used to be 6 patrol cars patrolling. Now there's 3 in the middle of the night. If you have a crime happen to you, if it's not in progress, they don't come. You report it by phone. This is, you think about what disintegrates a society is when you lose the basics of law and order. It's starting in our cities, it's progressing, and the thing that's making it much worse, scarily worse, is fentanyl. We'll talk about that with the border, but the fentanyl crisis in Pennsylvania, combined with these liberal prosecutors who aren't putting criminals in jail. And again, I want to say, out of all fairness, Bob Casey's been terrible on this. Last week, he got an endorsement from Indivisible Philadelphia, which is a defund the police movement. He's voted for sanctuary cities. He's voted against putting more money on the border with Border Patrol. He's voted against Kate's Law, which should have prosecuted illegal immigrants who are felons that come back into the United States. And he has said, as you just said, that the liberal left says that the problem with our law enforcement is systemic racism. That's what Bob Casey said. This is why we can't recruit folks for our state police. This is why in Pittsburgh, despite a new police officer making $65,000 a year, they cannot recruit enough people to fill these slots. And until we get behind the people who wear the uniform, and I've worn a different uniform, but so I feel this very, very much in my heart. Until we get behind the people, the men and women in blue, and say, listen, we are so grateful for what you do. Of course, there's some bad apples. There's bad apples in every organization. When there's a bad apple, you throw them out and you take care of them.
Yeah.
But we should be honored by the commitment they make to all of us. And without them, we're going to lose our society.
And Dave, on that point, well spoken. I think it's regrettably this time comes where we've covered so much and we've run out of time, which is why we're going to be coming back next week with Republican nominee for United States Senate, Dave McCormick, for part 2 of this special 2-part edition on why he wants to be a United States Senator. And in part 2, we will be discussing the Israel war with Hamas and what that means, the geopolitical implications for the world, as well as the insidious infiltration of China into our intellectual property, into our supply chains, and the threat they present to the national security of the United States. That'll all be in part 2. I hope you'll join us next week with Dave McCormick, part 2.